conference room, so apparently the information about the new time, new location, got to all those folks that have a strong interest in this, which is good.
What's that say? Presentation.
We have several items on our agenda
This is
that
Mashpee.
we'd like to get through tonight.
All right, then. go
Personally,
down
I don't
to-
like to sit still for more than 2 hours, so we're gonna try
That's
hard
it.
to be
Just
done
sort
by
through.
6:30, so as we move along through the evening, with multiple items here, I ask you to consider if you have something new to offer as we get into things. First item up on our agenda tonight is a presentation from SMAS
That looks like the one.
on the Little Pond Habitat Baseline update. As you know, the town spent quite a bit of money putting sewers into the Mara Vista Little Pond Peninsula. And we've been measuring various parameters. Ed will give you a detailed rundown of this.
Thank you.
I guess if there's good news, things haven't gotten worse. If there's sort of wait-and-see news, some places look a little better, other places look about the same when we look at all these stations. I will offer my own perspective, having been involved with the Boston Harbor project, that it took 10 or 15 years to really see a turnaround for the whole Boston Harbor ecosystem over time. So although what are we now, 4 or 5 years into the sewering, and everybody wants to see that everything's magically better, it's not magically better yet, but again, I think we can see some holding our own and/or getting better in portions of the system. And now I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good afternoon. So our task really was to set a new baseline, to sort of see where you are currently and compare it to sort of what we had available as a result of the Massachusetts Estuaries Project analysis, and see where you might go, given all of the things that have been done to try to improve the conditions in Little Pond. So, just to start, I'm Ed Eichner, principal at TMDL Solutions. I'm an adjunct professor at the Coastal Systems Program at the School for Marine Science and Technology at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And I'm going to run through, there's a tech memo that goes through and runs through all of this information. And so I'm going to summarize that. I'm representing a whole bunch of people who've worked on this. So there's some areas that I'm the expert in. So if you get into the weeds, I guess, I might have to get back to you on some of the answers. So Little Pond, it's about close to 50 acres. It's in between Great Pond and Falmouth Inner Harbor. It sort of has a shape, sort of like a Finger Lake from Upper New York. Inlet down close to Vineyard Sound. There we go. In terms of doing the baseline update, we repeated the MEP benthic and fauna analysis. That's basically looking at the animals in the sediments. We mapped the eelgrass and the macroalgae to see how generally they were faring. We looked at the total nitrogen levels. Nitrogen is driving what's going on with this ecosystem. So we looked at those to compare where it was at the MEP time to where it is now, see if there's any trends. And then we also looked at pond waters data for temperature increases that may have occurred over the past 30 years. That has been collected. And as I said, all of that is in a summary tech memo. So starting with the total nitrogen data, we have this upper chart here, upper graph table, is the data that was used in the MEP. This is 1997 to 2004. The mean data ran from the head, which is up here, about 2.3 down to 0.9 at LP1, around 0.9, a little bit lower at LP2, and then 0.7 or so at LP3. So there's a relatively high concentration here, and then a very flat gradient, but decreasing towards the inlet. So we looked at the data, we aggregated the data from 2016 to 2021 to see, compare that to what was collected at the MEP time, and say, okay, have things changed significantly at these same stations based on the data that's been collected by the pond watchers? And in general, it really hasn't. So LP1, LP2, LP3, basically the same. There's no statistical difference between those means. But there is a significant decrease up at LP head. And thinking about how the system functions and where it sits in the aquifer, it's probably not surprising. That's where you're seeing the reduction. Groundwater would tend to be focused in on the upper portions of the system. So any of the changes, the sewer system that was started, the connections that were started, I think in 2017, you're starting to see some of those impacts. So in terms of the baseline, LP 1, 2, and 3, you're pretty much the same place you were in the MEP. LP head has declined. We also looked at the total nitrogen data longitudinally across the whole record. This is all the pond watchers data from 97 through 2021. The graphs, this is LP head up here, LP1, LP2, LP3. The blue is the MEP data, annual averages. The oranges are the data post-MEP. And so what you can see is, in general, things really haven't changed significantly. There is a little bit of decline that's going on at LP head. But if we look at the key station, which is LP2, this is the threshold station. This is the station that has sort of been zeroed in on by DEP. So the idea being that if you get to a particular concentration at that location, the whole system should be healthy. That's sort of the starting point for the regulatory discussions. DEP has had a lot of discussions about nitrogen is one thing, but we really want to focus on eelgrass. LP2, that threshold is 0.45 milligrams per liter. That's this purple line here. And you can see that LP2 concentrations are above that number throughout from 97 through 2021. So pretty much, you know, I guess baseline-wise, you're pretty much sort of in the same circumstance as you were in terms of the MEP. As I mentioned, DEP is also focused on eelgrass and the restoration of eelgrass. These are the eelgrass coverages, these first three on the left. These pictures are from the MEP report. These are the eelgrass coverages. When we did the MEP analysis, DEP was focused on 1951 is essentially their baseline in those discussions. And there's about 27 acres of eelgrass in that analysis. And you can see by 1995, there is a loss that has occurred. These yellow dots are field confirmation. By 2001, when we did the MEP assessment, the area had shrunk down to 6 acres. For your new baseline, we did something different. These are all based on aerial interpretation with some field verification. In 2021, we went out with a boat and a camera and took pictures of the whole bottom. And so each of those frames was then analyzed and then composited into this map to show what the eelgrass coverage was, percent of the bottom in each of those frames. And you could sort of see, at least in my mind, that you're somewhere between the 1995 and the 2001 in terms of the coverage. One of the things that we sort of haven't resolved, and probably will come up as you go along in your discussions, as things start to improve and eelgrass starts to return and is healthy, the question then becomes, well, what is your defining characteristic of how much coverage is coverage? Is it 80% coverage of the bottom constitute a bed? Is it 100% coverage? Those sorts of things. I think it'll probably be a regulatory issue to work out. I actually went back to the SMAS staff and said, okay, well, how much how much area is this? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, okay, tell me what it is 100%. What is it 80%? And they were a little bit hesitant to do that. So I don't have a good answer for you at this point. If you want that answer, we can go eventually develop it. So basically, in terms of the baseline, there is some improvement in terms of the eelgrass coverage, but it's not back to what DEP, I think, is considering as the target at this point. The other thing to keep in mind is that the eelgrass that is there is has a challenging environment. We looked at macroalgae distribution as we were going out and as we took all those pictures of the bottom and looked at what was going on. Macroalgae is all over a lot of areas. It is crowding out some of the eelgrass. There is also epiphytic growth that is occurring on a lot of the eelgrass that is there. So the bottom line is this is still an impaired system. There's a lot of nutrients tied up in this macroalgae, and that will be one of the things that Steve was sort of alluding to. This system is going to take a while to sort of flush all of this out. You may get to acceptable nitrogen concentrations, but it's going to take a while to sort of get the eelgrass back to where it wants to be. We also looked at the animals and the sediments, the benthic infauna. We repeated what was done under the MEP. These are the stations that were sampled, LP1 through LP8. Same time of year, so we got a direct comparison in terms of what's going on. So during the MEP, it was in 2003. The new baseline was in 2021. MEP, poor quality habitat, mostly polychaetes, worms that love to live in highly organic situations. In 2021, it's still a poor quality habitat, but there are some signs of improvement, mostly in these upper sections up here, which sort of corresponds to what we saw with the water quality. So there's increased species counts, higher diversity in those sections. There is still, polychaetes are still the dominant in most of the stations, but there are some things like amphipods were coming in down in these lower sections. And in our experience, if you've got amphipods coming in, usually that's a sign that there's a little bit of improvement going on. So baseline-wise, still an impaired system, still has a ways to go, but there are little signs of improvement. And that's sort of a summary of what's going on overall with what's going on in Little Pond. We were also asked to look at temperature. Now, this is not something that we generally do in the MEP, sort of map out what's going on with temperature, but we had the temperature data from the pond watchers over a long period of time. And so we have LP head, LP1, LP2, and LP3. Generally, temperatures decreased from 1987 to 2000, and then they started increasing. We looked at trend analysis since 2000, and there are small and significant increases in those trends. The R squareds are pretty poor, so it's sort of squinting kind of data that you would be looking at. When we looked at the trends, there's a difference between the stations. As you move closer to the inlet, the trend is greater. So if we start actually at LP head, which is the furthest northern innermost station, there is no trend. And when I look at this data, that sort of makes sense, because that, again, that's the focus of the groundwater. Groundwater tends to be sort of have a consistent temperature. It's going to vary by season, but you're collecting this data during the summer, so it's going to sort of be consistent that way. The increase in temperature as you get closer to the sound suggests, closer to the inlet suggests that the sound actually is the source of the increase of what's going on with the temperature. So you have basically the groundwater as a moderating influence in the northern portions of the system. You have higher temperatures coming in from the sound, and they're sort of meeting and mixing in the middle of Little Pond. So actually this is pretty interesting. So where you're sort of going from here, you've got a lot of things that are in flux, a lot of things going on. You've got the Seward area, which my understanding is pretty much complete at this point. But you have different sorts of groundwater conditions on either side and up to the north. You're going to have higher groundwater flows up in the north side, probably a little reduced down on this side, and then really long groundwater times over here. The USGS, this is the USGS water table map in a section of Mara Vista. 60 to 100 feet per year in terms of groundwater travel time, and that means nitrogen moving with the groundwater. Generally, when we look at the upper portions of the aquifer, we're looking at about a foot per day, so about 360 feet per year. So you get an idea of how much slower it is over here. So based on the sort of the groundwater divide that probably exists here, which is probably down the middle of the peninsula, the USGS in their section said 3 to 7 years that it's going to take for that groundwater to reach Little Pond. So I would anticipate that you're going to start to see things pretty quick. In the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to start to see reductions in the nitrogen concentrations in Little Pond. How that ripples through the rest of the ecology, that remains to be seen. But you've got this baseline study, so you've got a good sense, I think, of where you're starting from at the very least. So in summary, we've got reductions at the northern innermost station, LP head. It's gone from 2.3 to 1.5. There are no statistically significant total nitrogen changes at the other stations compared to the MEP. The benthic infauna, there are some signs of improvement, but it's still an impaired system. Eelgrass, same sort of deal. There are some signs of improvement, but again, it's still impaired with macrophytes and epiphytic growth. And then temperature, you are seeing some increases that are occurring with the largest increases closer to the inlet. How that ripples through what's going on with the ecology, that's an open question as well. So all in all, I think you're pretty well set in terms of having a comparison point as you move forward and sort of see where you compare to not only your TMDL, but what happens to the ecology overall. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions you might have.
Comments, concerns from the board first?
Ed, there's a lot of noise in the nitrogen signal, and you mentioned in the full report the issue of the constriction, in some cases, a complete blockage of the inlet. Is there a historical record somewhere of how frequent and how often it was, how long it lasted? Because I could very easily see that, input from that end being a pulsed signal that then is modulated as you move upstream.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's tracking that,
Yeah.
the amount of occlusion or restriction that may be occurring.
Well, I know at times,
So, the Marine Division is responsible for getting the dredge, and they do show up, so we could backtrack.
that's exactly where I'm headed with this.
Kristen, we could backtrack and check
We
in
could
with
have
them
a
and get you
record.
the data of when they dredged it, so you could try to take
Yep.
a look at that.
Sure.
Okay?
That's where I'm headed with this, because we'd have a record of when
They
they
know, they keep track
use
of
the
it.
excavator to clear the hole.
I think it's
But
every
anyway,
several
I
years they
think
come in.
plugging that in might smooth out the noise in that nitrogen signal. It's not gonna solve our problem, but it would give us some idea of what's going on up there.
Yeah. I mean, whatever you do at the inlet is going to have impacts
Yeah.
throughout the rest of the system. There's
Yeah.
no question about it.
Others?
Along that line, I know, because I live in that neighborhood and walk that once or twice a day, it occludes totally several times a year, depending on storm direction. If it's coming in from the southeast, it's going to plug, especially if the wind persists over several tide cycles. And the DPW is very good about clearing it, though. Usually within 24, 48 hours of after total occlusion, it's cleared. They also, and again, the records would exist of when they did a detailed deep dredge of that inlet, not just clearing the occlusion, but only in the last several years have they gone on the inlet side and dug deep and took out truckload after truckload of material. So there's a much deeper inlet on the shore side, if you will, the inland side. And that really improves the flow there, because it used to never be able to drain because there was a sandbar right before the outflow. So that's made a significant difference, I think, in clarity, but obviously not impacting nitrogen. So I think, the point is, the records are there. It's quick, but it does happen a number of times a year. So.
Ken? Comment?
Well, I've had a persistent question in my mind about the 0.45 total N number and how that was arrived at.
I can't give you a
critical loading.
definitive answer since I did not develop that.
Yeah.
I will tell you generally, when we were doing the work for the MEP and we would set those criteria, those threshold concentrations, we would look at first within the system to see where there was healthy ecosystems or healthy components of that system, see what the nitrogen concentrations were at that point. If we couldn't find that healthy portion of the system, we would generally then start to look at other systems and say, okay, in this type of environment, let's say the south side of the Cape, those kinds of concentrations have healthy sort of settings. I think in this particular situation, this system has been looked at a whole lot by a lot of different people. So I would imagine there's a lot of history to sort of draw on to be able to sort of backtrack and say, okay, this is when it was healthy, what were the likely concentrations be, or what were the concentrations actually measured? So, those sorts of things to try to get that threshold concentration nailed down.
Is it your guess that in 5 years, there'll be a big enough change that the current noise is academic?
Within 5 years, I would guess there is going to be a significant change in the nitrogen concentrations. What that translates into the rest of what the impacts are, I think that's a bigger open question.
Any comments from the audience on this report? Hilda?
What's the role of oysters in this?
That one is outside of my area of expertise. I mean, obviously, they're gonna be clearing the water and taking out something and depositing their feces into the sediments and having some sort of role. I don't know what the population is here. I know that there's been some efforts to expand upon the population that is here. But I'm not familiar with the measurements that have been collected there.
What was your question, Hilda? I didn't actually hear it.
Just wanted to know what the role of the oysters has been in any possible improvements of the water quality in Little Pond.
Yeah,
compared
we
to-
should go, again, we should gather some data and pass it along, Kristen, because I think initially we were growing seed oysters in there, but now the oyster grouping has now moved over more towards McCoy, correct?
So it's a very small farm that MES has in there, and it's mostly south on the east side of the inlet. It's maybe 1/4 of an acre, and they do various pilots. I know they piloted scallops 1 year, but it's not a significant aquaculture operation there to have any kind of meaningful impact on the nitrogen concentrations, definitely further upstream.
I mean, I will tell you, we've been monitoring the system over in Orleans, Lonnie's Pond,
Yeah.
that is part of the Pleasant Bay system. And you can see the impact of the oyster. It's a much smaller system, and you can see the impact of the oysters there. Not only in terms of removing the nitrogen just in their growth, but the impact that is also occurring in the sediments. We are seeing changes we're seeing that change from polychaetes into a lot more amphipods, and there's hope that as that continues to change, we're gonna get additional longer-lived species as well.
Initially, we were doing aquaculture inside Little Pond, just to sort of demonstrate that we could do aquaculture. But because that water body was in such an impaired state, we couldn't really raise oysters for market there. We could only raise them up to a certain point where they switch from. I can't remember whether it's male to female or female to male.
Yeah.
But at a certain point in growth, they switch. And then we would relay them someplace for a year to grow more, and then we would open those beds up to the public. That program has shifted around quite a bit, and we're more focused.
Yeah,
Quite end.
over in Orleans, as we've moved through this, we've gone, the effort was about putting seed oysters in, and we were finding that they weren't working real well, so we went to year 1, and then there's a shift that occurs in the middle of the summer from year 1 from the previous year to year 2, and actually we seem to be hitting the target, which was about 75 kilos removal.
I think we're seeing some similar values over in our Coit operation, Washburn Island. In the back? Oh, somebody took your seat.
Sorry, I work good from anywhere. First off, yeah, there's a small amount of oysters there now,
Yeah,
but there was a substantially larger amount of oysters in the beginning.
correct.
And anybody that lives on that pond can tell you that after a year, the stench went away and you could see the bottom of the pond.
Yep.
So I think that's kind of a dismissive statement. And I like the term you used, noise. There was some noise in the MEP. Brian Howes told us that if we had doubled the size of the opening of the inlet of Little Pond, we could have sewered 30% less. And I think this kind of demonstrates that's true. And also, I was familiar with the people from ours that did the installation of the sewer. And when I first met one of the guys, he told me that his first trip to Falmouth, there was an accident by Kenyon, so the GPS sent him around and over Little Pond, and the first thing he comment was to me, he goes, Mark, he goes, I don't see why they're sewering this much, because they could have just opened that pond up, and they would have been able to sewer much less. And it also points out the kind of inequity in which we address this thing, because opening Little Pond wasn't good enough, but We're gonna open Orange Pond. I mean, they're both bodies of water, they're both affected by the tides and the currents. And opening Little Pond inlet would have necessitated less sewering. But of course, that means less tax money. Because a lot of this, as I've said plenty of times, isn't so much to do with cleaning up a stream as achieving a revenue stream. And just my 2 cents.
Right. I'll take one more comment or question, because I want to keep the agenda moving. Kim?
Yeah, Kim Kumar. Do your models take into account the possibility of warming waters over the next 10 years and how this may affect the nutrients in the water?
No, they don't. I mean, the way the models are constructed is to look at what the existing conditions are and to be able to reliably predict that with the use of the model. So we try to account for all of the various nitrogen sources, the nitrogen sources from the watershed, the nitrogen sources from the sediments, atmosphere, and try to put those all in with the way that the tides go in and out, and make sure that the model can accurately predict all of that. If you have a validated model, then you can take that and use it to evaluate other things, like if you wanted to evaluate an opening, you could do that. Or if you want a sewer, that what sort of impact and what sort of concentrations you're going to get.
Thank you, Ed.
All right.
With the board's good grace and approval, I'd like to keep Ed here momentarily and move item 5 up on the agenda next, which is, we got the herringbrook report a meeting or two ago, and the Buzzards Bay Coalition retained their own outside science person to look at that report and issued their opinion as to where we're at there, and I think it would be appropriate if this board agrees and is so willing to concur, that we pass that to you, Ed. You take a look at it, tell us if you need more money to respond or not, or but I don't think we're ready to kind of review or talk to that contrary opinion until you have a chance to look at that. We hired you to put something together, and then come back at some point and say what they raised is or isn't appropriate or valid, or what the next steps might be. So with that, if the board agrees to pass it to Ed to take a look at, I would accept the vote to do that.
Also move.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
I'll allow people to have some discussion from the audience if they want to, only on whether or not we're passing the report to Ed, not on the overall herringbrook report or the rebuttal right now. That's not the subject matter. Does anybody want to comment? Okay. Thank you, Ed. I mean, we'll see that you get a copy of that letter.
I'll talk to Amy about it.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. All right. The next item on our agenda is Kristen put together a while back an assessment of urine diversion. I think it is a reasonable, in my opinion, reasonable document to kind of keep the conversation going on urine diversion. We did receive several comments on it, and Kristen, you took a look at those comments and modified the report. Do you want to take a minute and just say what you changed and whatnot?
So I took into account the comments that came through, and basically the updates that I made were instead of taking the average of the results of the assessment from the literature mass values, we looked at it from what the maximum potential could be from literature values to try and come at a mass number that could be expected if it were implemented, and then taking the very minimal data of the active pilots going on to come up with, right now, with the limited data, what kind of percent reduction could be incorporated if a pilot were to go forward without guidance from the state. So it didn't really affect the overall outcome of the report. And that was the bulk of the edits.
Again, I personally view the document as an informative document. There's not determinative numbers there yet. We've been working on the pilot proposal, which is on the agenda as well tonight. So, does anybody on the board want to comment on the revisions that Krista made to the report and/or the response to comments? Does anybody in the audience care to speak to it? Earl?
Yeah, the Green Center asked for that report to be done. We thank you very much. A lot of effort went into it. Sorry. Earl Barnhart from the Green Center. The Green Center asked for that report to be done, and we thank you because a lot of effort went into it. We were pleased to see that the result was that it said that if urine diversion could remove enough nitrogen in a watershed to meet the TMDL, if the 84% of the people in the watershed would divert some, but not necessarily all, of the urine in their homes.
Any other comments? Billy?
Hilda Mengay from the Green Center. I want to make people aware that we are in a climate crisis and that we have to make changes. We can't go on the way we always have been. And that is just a reality that we haven't really addressed. So the report says from the UN, this was many years ago, now we only have 7 years left. To avoid catastrophe, human societies have 12 years, now 7, to completely transform the way we use energy, natural resources, water, and land. That was in 2018. After that, it has only gotten worse because we do not pay attention to this. We keep going the way we always have.
Hildy, are you talking to this report
Yes.
and the values in this report?
Yes, because urine diversion, not only has it proven in this report that it has a substantial importance in removing nitrogen and phosphorus, but it also mitigates climate change because it doesn't use much of any energy, and it conserves water and it recycles nutrients. All have an impact on climate. So I want to bring that up as a very important part of why we think this is an important direction to go. The other one is that the Mass DEP, in their Comprehensive Water Management Plan Guide, states clearly the plan should develop, carefully compare, and evaluate alternatives, and the process must include the necessary steps in ensuring that the planning effort results in the most cost-effective and environmentally sound wastewater management plan. And I'm glad to see that urine diversion is now taken in serious consideration, that this plan developed, this draft report was developed, that was really good. And we hope that we take this seriously as a way forward to reduce our nitrogen reduction, phosphorus reduction, and reduce the cost of wastewater management plans. Because that is ultimately the goal, that we want to have the best plan for the least cost with the best outcome for the environment and for climate change. Thank you for the report again.
Any other comments? I guess I'm asking the board to accept the informational document as revised.
The revised, yes, I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Good, all right. The next item on our agenda is, we received a proposal back on August 4th, after our last meeting, from the Mass Test Center. And it was a proposal for urine diversion. This board has not yet considered that. This is going to be the first time that we look at that. So this board is unlikely, with the timetable we have, to actually make a hard recommendation to the selectmen yet. I did advise those folks who have been advocating for urine diversion as citizens or whatever of the timetable, and offered up that they could, if they wish, make a petition as article as they felt appropriate. I have been informed that a petitioner's article was submitted in a timely fashion last Friday. I will just read the article to you, and I'll distribute a copy again, not necessarily a discussion item, but just an informational item for everybody on this board. The article as written says, to see if the town will vote to advise the select board to authorize a urine diversion pilot project in conjunction with the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center to test urine diversion as a method for effectively reducing the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus entering our waters, or do or take any action on the matter. And, just so people have a copy of that petition. Did I get that correct? I think I got that correct, right? Okay. The other piece of news before we get into the conversation on that is, one of the next key steps with any of this piloting work, at least, has been to get the DEP involved to see that what we're doing in the pilot will in fact be what the, what they would like to see in order to go down that path for it to get to the point where they got approval. I know that the Green Center reached out to Mary Beth, and Kristen reached out as well, and I believe as of today, based upon Brian's schedule, we're going to have a meeting on the 13th to talk with Mary Beth about, as urine diversion goes forward, you know, what we should collect that they would want to see. There's several items in this proposal, and I think I'll give Brian an opportunity to step to the mic and sort of tell us what's in the proposal. But, you know, we want to be sure that what we're doing, when we get around to doing it, is what the DEP is going to need or want or expect to see in order for them to be able to say urine diversion is an acceptable technology and has some benefit to us all. Okay? With that, I'm going to turn over to you, Brian. One small item in your proposal, you have a price page in there.
Yep.
When I add up those numbers, I come to $897,904, not the $799,364 that you stated. And so I don't know whether there's a number inside there that's not the right number, or whether you didn't add everything up. Just
Now, you're seeing the result of a late change and Microsoft Word not doing math for you. So I apologize for that.
you know, not criticizing.
We'll
just
submit a,
people have been kicking the number around.
Which is the correct?
it's the larger number.
Just introduce yourself. 'cause I'm not
Sure,
everybody
I'd be
knows.
happy to. And I always ask for the tall microphone, but they never set that up for me, no matter where I go. So I'm Brian Baumgartel. I'm the Director of the Wastewater Division at the Barnstable County Department of Health and Environment. And in that capacity, I'm also Director of the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center. Sometimes we call it the Technology Center. But we were approached about 2 months ago at this point, I think, to put together a proposal for the town of Falmouth to assist in the assessment of urine diversion as a potential route by which we could address some of our water quality issues. And we had, subsequent to those discussions, we had some follow-up discussions with members of the Falmouth community who we've worked with on a number of occasions, and we talk with them quite frequently, and they had some input on the draft proposal that we had put together. And as a group, of course, you know, we are a science-based organization, so we tried to put together a proposal that would answer a lot of the questions surrounding urine diversion. And those are reflected here in the project scope of work, which is on page 2. And if you'd like, I could just kind of give brief summaries of those main points of the scope of work for the benefit of the group. So first and foremost, identifying 50 participating households in Falmouth. You know, you're always looking for the largest data set that you can get. Obviously, the more replicates that you have, the better the data set that you can generate. Unfortunately, you know, the data sets that we have to work with are relatively small. So this particular project would help to fill a significant need in data generation with respect to urine diversion. The project would complete a UD method options assessment at each participating household to determine how urine will be diverted and stored at each location. So this speaks to the variations in the ways in which you can divert urine from the waste stream. Everything from as simple as what's called a QB, which is essentially, I grew up in the 90s and we had these in our car. If you had to go to the bathroom when you were on the road, it was a container that you could go in. It's very similar in nature to that. It's a little bit nicer than that. And in fact, myself, we have a couple at the test center, and I used one for the first time yesterday. And I will say they are not quite as disruptive to your routine as you might think they would be. There are fixtures which can attach to the wall in the form of a urinal, which divert urine off into a separate holding facility. And then there are fixtures which are more familiar to most folks in terms of shape. It's a toilet which, rather than having a single receptacle for all waste, it diverts urine one way and fecal matter the other way. So this part of the proposal would work with the participating households to identify what would be the best solution for them, to make sure that we are looking at the different types of technologies that are out there, because it's important to identify which ones have the best in terms of efficacy. And really, when it comes to urine diversion, it's asking us to do something significantly different than we've had drilled into our heads since we were children, which was to use the potty that's in our bathrooms. And it's definitely ingrained in how we use the bathroom. So making sure that homeowners have that opportunity to sort of select the technology that would work best for them. Installation of water meters as needed to isolate the indoor water usage. As we've learned, as we've progressed with the nitrogen issue, we've come to realize that concentration isn't the only number we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at what's called mass load. And in order to do that, you need to know how much water is flowing through a home. So the water meters would give us the ability to isolate the indoor water usage, so that we can get a sense of how many actual pounds of phosphorus are being output from that particular household, both before and post-implementation of the urine diversion fixtures. We'd be doing, in conjunction with those water meters, the sampling of the baseline pre-urine diversion septic tank nutrient effluent concentration, and the pre-water usage to get sort of that baseline that we would need as a comparison against any project. We'd be working through the design, permitting, fixture acquisition, and installation of these different urine diversion systems, probably using some sort of a project consultant and a series of installation contractors. This project does include subsidies to help offset the cost of urine diversion fixtures. I believe if you look at my incorrectly summed page, you'll find that we had recommended a $10,000 subsidy for each participant. And this is based on work that we've done in on other technologies in the on-site world, primarily innovative alternative technologies where providing subsidies can help offset some of the cost and overcome some of the barriers associated with getting people to participate in programs. This would offer a $10,000 subsidy, flat subsidy, no matter what you're doing. So some people may choose to do QBs, which would be a low-cost option. Obviously, they wouldn't avail themselves of the full $10,000. There may be some people who want to do something much more advanced or have multiple fixtures. This would kind of cap that subsidy at the $10,000 level. $10,000 is something that we've used in past projects that's worked fairly well for us. So it was a recommendation as part of this project. The project would do ongoing sampling of the septic tank nutrient effluent concentration and water usage, and calculation of the household nutrient effluent loading during the urine diversion portion of the project. It is important for us not only to understand how much nitrogen and phosphorus we're removing with the urine that's being diverted, but we also need to understand what is also making its way into the environment, because as we know, when it comes to actually taking regulatory action with respect to DEP, they want to know what you're putting into the environment, not necessarily what you're taking out, as being the important number. So we need to have septic tank nutrient concentrations to see what that actual load is coming out of a house, even with the urine diversion fixtures in place. The project would do collection of the diverted urine. So, I mean, obviously, if we're separating it from the typical wastewater stream, it needs to go somewhere. In most cases, it would go into some sort of holding tank on the property. If it were one of the more familiar fixtures, the urine diversion toilets or the urinals, there would be some sort of a holding tank, a tight tank in Board of Health parlance. For those who have been on the Board of Health in the past, perhaps, it's a term you're familiar with. It's just simply a septic tank that has no outlet in it and needs to be pumped out at a frequency to make sure that there's no overflow. So we'd be assessing how much urine was put into that tank, pumping that out, and then taking it to a disposal location following the analysis that we'd be doing. In the case of the cubies, which are the little tanks that you are completely separate from your typical wastewater stream, there would need to be some sort of a collection tank on the property for the homeowner to be able to take the contents of the cubie and to put it in a location where we could come along later, do an assessment of how much volume was there, and then be able to take measurements on the nitrogen concentrations. And again, in that case, we would be disposing of the material following that analysis. One important part of any urine diversion project in particular, this is kind of the way I feel about composting toilet technologies again, is because they're so much different from what we're comfortable with. It's important to do education and outreach to make sure that people understand what these things are and how exactly they might impact their day-to-day life. We felt that it was important to engage not only in the data collection piece of things to see whether, from a number standpoint, urine diversion is a legitimate option, but also to make a good assessment of what potential homeowner uptake would be. Because you can have a great solution, but if nobody wants to do it, it's not so great a solution in the end. So this would provide some ongoing education and outreach with respect to that, in conjunction with a lot of our project partners. And then again, we'd be doing the ongoing social acceptance assessment using a project consultant, because as I said, it is important for us to understand whether or not people would do this over the long term. A 2-year project where you're saying, I'm going to do something for a little while might be one thing, but to say, will you do this 5 years, 10 years, 20 years is a different prospect. Some might be willing to pee in a jug for a while for the purposes of a scientific study, but it is important for us to assess whether they would want to do that long term and what their concerns would be and why they might not want to do something like that long term. It's important to get an assessment of the how and the reasons behind folks thinking on these types of changes. So that's the general scope of work with respect to this project. The budget as outlined, I think, does a good accounting of what would be needed to execute on that scope of work, which would include, personnel time, those kinds of things, supplies and materials for being able to remove the urine from the homes. MassTC has purchased a urine pasteurizer from the Rich Earth Institute, in Brattleboro, Vermont, because we have an interest in not only the diversion and collection of urine, but the ultimate disposition of the urine. I think perhaps short-term, bringing it to a wastewater treatment plant is, of course, an option and would help you sort of get ahead of the fact that you don't have pipes everywhere. If you could divert urine and bring it to the treatment plant, you can sort of extend your reach out a little bit if you kind of think of it that way without having the pipes in the ground. And additionally, because we're diverting urine, it is a nitrogen and phosphorus resource that, historically, the Romans and the early Europeans would probably be shaking their heads at us for just trying to get rid of this stuff. So, looking at potential beneficial reuse possibilities for urine is a project that we are also proposing to embark on in addition to this. So, the associated materials and those sorts of things, water meters, laboratory analyses, which is, of course, the most important part of any of these types of research studies, and then the subsidies, which brings you to the project total, which you had mentioned earlier, rather than the $799 that I have listed here. So, happy to take any questions if you would like.
Just, if I can.
Sure.
So, as we evaluate this alternative, is it applicable only to Falmouth's nitrogen-sensitive area, or is it applicable to all the nitrogen-sensitive areas on the Cape?
This would be applicable anywhere you have toilets,
So
really.
So
Yeah.
would it make sense for Barnstable County to be funding a portion of this work, because it will benefit the entire Cape?
That's a fair question. One I can't answer because I don't control budgets at the county, but you do have an Assembly of Delegates member. The Assembly of Delegates at the county are the ones responsible for making fiscal appropriations. And I would, if the town wanted to pursue something like that through them, we can obviously bring those things forward, but to have our town partners also engaging from their end definitely puts a lot more weight on proposals like that. So if that's something you want to pursue, I would recommend
All of the sample locations, will they all be Falmouth residents?
In the case of this, we would do all Falmouth residents. If we were to do it with county funding, we might look to, engage some of the other towns in the region, because we'd be using regional money, so, yeah.
And I just want to frame it.
Directly related to that, to what you were just.
Okay, go ahead.
But you work for the county. So I would think that you would be expected to be at least 50% of the delegation that goes to the county asking them for the money. And that you would have no objection to getting urine from other towns. It's the same stuff.
It's the same stuff, yeah. No, it's definitely the same stuff. I myself, I'm a staff member at the county. I can bring proposals forward, and it's up to our elected officials of the county to decide whether or not projects like that get funded.
But, you're personally interested in this. I can tell you believe in it.
Yeah,
As you should.
yeah.
It's a good idea. Why wouldn't you already have gone to the county?
We have approached them with projects, but it's not, they're a political thing. It's difficult as staff sometimes to bring these types of projects forward to the elected officials. It's not quite as straightforward, unfortunately, as it may seem, which is why I recommend that, if the board were willing to support such a proposal, to bring it out in that forum, maybe through your Assembly of Delegates member or through the County Commissioner's office, would put additional weight towards moving some sort of project like this forward. But I can't speak to if there are county funds available, if not, what the county plans are for those things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so just to frame the discussion that we're going to have here, I see there's a couple of little end products that we might get to. One would be to probably, first off, Ed's been sort of the point person on urine diversion for a while, and I'd like to perhaps find another individual on this board who'd be willing to work with Ed on urine diversion, going to the point of coming back to this board. We have two meetings in September. Maybe at the next meeting, or no later than the meeting after that, come back and, make a recommendation to this board as to how we want to either speak to or support or the petitioner's article that will come up at town meeting. And then secondly, where we go with the overall scope of this proposal over time, what we think is good, what we have some concerns over. Brian, Amy, I, and Ed met a week ago or a week and a half ago, because Brian submitted the proposal, asked to meet after we got it to discuss it. We had a reasonable discussion and said we put you on this agenda tonight without making any hard decisions at that time, okay? So I'm going to open up the conversation from the board, but I just wanted to frame where we might be going to.
Can I
Yeah.
ask a question of Brian?
Yeah.
Tom's had his hand up for a bit, so I'm going to go to Tom first.
Well over half your budget is the subsidies for physical alterations, and you mentioned a couple times that someone might get into the game for as little as $100, and someone else is gonna max out with the deluxe thing. Is there any way, I mean, you could, I'm hoping you could like maybe take a third out of the requested funds by saying, you know, we expect the mean value to be in here somewhere. Because what I don't know what happens at the end of this project, and it turns out maybe there's, God forbid, $150,000 that didn't go into subsidies, whether there'd be any sort of clawback provisions. I just, as a little aside here too, I think certainly in Barnstable for sure, with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, you've got a base right there that could maybe activate, motivate their assembly delegate too to move this forward, because as was brought up, this isn't a problem peculiar to Falmouth, and it would be good to spread the base and have as many groups involved in this as, or as many people or potential people involved in this as possible.
Right, right. The reason we went and said $10,000 for all is because we don't know.
Right, yeah, that, no, I
Right.
understand
In
that.
writing grants, you always say, I'm going to go for the worst case, you know.
Yep.
You know, when you're doing personnel, you say they're going to select all the highest quality, you know, the highest benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I would say that if everybody selected QBs as an example, town would get the money back.
Right.
You know, we're not gonna propose to spend it on something else. That's just not what we do. So,
Right.
yeah, we'd have some sort of contract
Good.
in place for that, I would believe.
Ken?
Tom asked my question.
Ken, you're up, right? Tom asked it.
He asked my question,
Okay.
yeah.
Are you
I just want to make sure that, John?
Not at the moment.
Maura?
Right, I had a little bit of a question on just the timeline, and maybe this, you know, will work itself out, but it looks to me like there's only a month to identify the 50 participating households. And I'm just curious if it takes longer than, I mean, for the first sort of month anyway, to
So,
get somebody engaged.
sure.
I'm
So,
gonna jump in, because I think the Green Center and Kim, you guys have already been recruiting people. When you, last number I heard was 40 plus?
Well, there's a QB project going right now, which has and Hill and Earl know this better than I do. It's got about 40 participants using QBs. I don't see QBs being the long-term, a long-term practice.
Yeah, but I'm
to
trying,
popularize
yeah.
diversion.
Yeah, I'm trying to help her to, is a month a
there's
reasonable
there's
amount of time
already a
to
group of
find 50
people.
people that would
Yeah,
get
yeah.
into this program? I think there's already 40 plus people that, even though they're at the QB stage there,
Right.
you know.
In Falmouth already,
But
yeah.
doing it for 2 months. We're talking about people doing this for 2 years. I'm not sure you're gonna get people using QBs for 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna let Maura finish, right?
No, that was sort of my question, is just like, how do we recruit people ahead of time to make this timeline work? I guess is my
No, good,
question.
that's a good, yeah.
that's a great question, and you're referring to the chart on the back page here. So this is actually in terms of number of months. So this is, overall, we identified this as a 36-month study, start to finish. We do a 2-year data collection period, but there's always that lag in the beginning where you're trying to get participants in these kinds of things. So we did build in, it's actually 9 months of identification of those participating households at the beginning of this. Starting from from left to right, and then getting the options assessments done, kind of in conjunction with that, so that hopefully we'd have all of the installations done ideally by month 12 at the latest, because we have a 3-year project and we want to make sure we got through all the data collection that we could possibly get from 24 months. Now, this could be a project that could be expanded in terms of timeline or shrunk in terms of timeline. When we do a lot of these types of projects with alternative septic systems, we're very concerned about weather and climate, because that has a direct impact on performance of these technologies. It's not really the case with urine diversion. I think you could get a pretty solid data set if you wanted to reduce, the length of the data collection piece of things. But, we recommend 36 months, considering the 24-month data collection period, which gives that leeway at the beginning.
Sorry, can I ask a follow-up question? I just wanted the design and installation are sort of combined in your scope as well, and I was just curious, based on your experience, maybe with composting toilets or another, you know, device or technique or technology, that's the word I want. Does it normally, I'm just worried that the design and installation is gonna take longer than anticipated, and I wondered what your experience with that so far has been.
So this is going to depend on our discussions with DEP and how they're going to approach this in terms of permitting. We did have a discussion with them today about some of this, and I think we'll have a very positive discussion when we meet with them in I think it's a week or two from now, as a group to talk about this. But it's going to depend ultimately where they lie on, you know, are they going to consider this as an alternative technology? In which case, there's the whole pilot provisional sort of procedure that we may have to follow. So that'll definitely have an impact on timeline and uptake, for sure.
I mean, I would suggest as we get to a more definitive proposal, that there are, you know,
Split it out a little
no,
more.
there's
maybe.
moments in time where we get, you know, just like the watershed permits, you know, you come in and you say after a year, we're either getting what we need to get or not, or, and tweak the schedule. John, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to comment, I think the program that we did in collaboration with the Coalition for Buzzards Bay in West Falmouth is a good indication of how long it takes you to line up 30 households for a project like this. Corin is sitting there, I can't remember, but it took some cajoling and some time to put that project together.
It took about 18 months to get 20 permitted.
Yeah. And in this case, I will say, because these are they're interior fixtures, you're talking about the plumbing board being associated with some of this. There may be permitting with the plumbing board as well, and some needed variances. It was something that you had to do for the first study, the older study, the 2014 one. So, you know, there will be some hangups along the way, but I wouldn't say they're insurmountable hangups in terms of getting systems in. Particularly if people want to use cubies. I mean, honestly, that would be perfect for us if people are willing to do cubies for 2 years, because there's no installation, there's none of that stuff. It's much simpler for sure. So.
A couple of points I would make, you know, and as Steve said, I've gotten kind of deeply involved in this from the get-go, and I think, you know, first off, I think it's a very viable tool that we would want to have as we look to protect and clean up our estuaries. It has a lot of potential. There are a great many of issues to overcome as we go forward, and I think, as you said, Brian, 2 weeks from now, we have a meeting scheduled with some state authorities to get some guidance as to what they would look for in a pilot study, how we would have to tailor this to meet their needs and get their approval. I've had discussions with the town plumbing inspector also about some of the technical issues of plumbing in a hard fixture and the storage tank, et cetera. And, you know, the $10,000 subsidy, if somebody goes flat out and gets a fixture and a tight tank and all the proper approved plumbing, 10,000 is not an unreasonable number. Personally, I feel that data from a cubby or some collection device that may or may not get used on a regular basis isn't going to be really meaningful outside of saying, here's what's in urine. And I think there's a pretty good idea of what that chemistry is already. I would like to see the program evolve to being participants that are willing to do the structural alteration and install a permanent fixture, and there's some really great products out there that are, you know, less than $1,000 a piece. Some of them I've seen are only a few hundred, that have the dual discharge capability. That is, I think, something people would be comfortable in using, how often they would use it, and in which form. I think it's going to be important for participants to be willing to keep a journal or diary of who's using it, how often, and, you know, what changes in the population of that household are going forward. So, you know, there are just details like that. But I think to say, hey, if somebody wants to just goof around with a cubby or a small storage tank and we'll give them $1,000, I don't think that data is really going to be meaningful and something that we're going to try to sell to the general public going forward. You have to be marketing a technology, and I look at this as a marketing problem. You have to define what the program involves, what its benefits are, and, you know, as Hildy has said, and Earl, there's a lot of cost benefits potential to this to minimize the need for sewering, but it's only one of the technologies we would want to use as a community. It's sewering, definitely got to be done in the densely populated areas. Urine diversion has a tremendous potential, especially in the pond areas that are further inland and not as densely built up. And I think a pilot centered around a particular pond or two with a lot of participants, a percentage of the residents that are affecting that pond would be a powerful tool to convince the state that, hey, this is worth approving to be in our toolbox, along with the oysters and the inlet widenings and the permeable reactive barriers and any other things that come down the road. But I think the program has to be designed with something that is going to be the long-term, permanent, not just a couple of months, not 2 years, but decades of utilization by the average household, because it's kind of, you know, you don't have an issue here. It's easy. The only thing you're going to have to do is pay for pumping out that extra tank, that tight tank, and it could cost several $100s to pump out a 500-gallon tight tank 2 or 3 times a year. It depends on how much you use it, but it is a cost going forward. But it's a hell of a lot cheaper than sewering. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than an AI system, which the track record is pretty lousy. So, you know, that's kind of some of the questions I have, some of my personal perspective, and things I think are going to be important as we discuss it with the state and come up with a viable program to present to town meeting for funding, the selectmen for approval, and their support. I think it's worth it. I think it's got a lot of potential, but I think we got to do a lot of groundwork before we move forward.
I want to make sure we get to the audience too, because before we run out of time today.
Do you have in mind any incentives to keep people using it?
Incentives are tricky when you're dealing with government funding. I would love to see perhaps one of our nonprofit partners come up with some sort of an incentive program. I think that would be a more appropriate avenue for incentives like that than trying to parse that through the whole government procurement process.
And related, will the people have some financial skin in the game? In other words, the equivalent of an insurance deductible. In other words, we don't subsidize them 100%, so that it costs them to trash it.
Yeah, and that's why we selected the $10,000 number, because I think for a lot of the situations where people are installing permanent fixtures, that won't cover the full amount, particularly in situations where you're making significant modifications to the plumbing in the home. I mean, kind of by definition, by you doing urine diversion, you're putting in new piping. So, you know, I think a $10,000 subsidy would be appropriate and give homeowners skin in the game, as you say, and that's the same same terminology we use when we're talking about trying to promote, you know, various IA technologies. I think it's important for homeowners to feel that sort of economic pressure on their own end, that I've invested in this, I want to make sure that I'm using it properly, because I think sometimes if you pay for the whole thing, you know.
And with one last thing, with the original IA demo project 10 or 12 years ago, people were required to remove all the conventional fixtures in their house, which was, it made them open their eyes and realize that this was real. And I think DEP probably did and probably will require that. Do you plan to require that?
That would be, I mean, that would be at the discretion of the town of Falmouth, if that's something that you would wish to do. You know, certainly it would give us the best reading on how much nitrogen is diverted via this method. But as I said, we'll be monitoring what's going out of the home, and even in cases where you might not get 100% use, which could honestly happen to anyone. You know, that you may have a day where you're gung-ho about using your UD fixture, and there are other days where you say, oh boy, not feeling so great today. You know, I might not want to, I might not want to have that option, to be honest. So at a minimum, you know, it gives us some information on, you know, what are some of your reasonings for not selecting that fixture that particular day. All that data, I think, has some benefit. But we need to be very careful in the data that we're collecting in terms of what's the meta information that goes with this. And as you said, journaling, you know, what you're doing, how did you use it? Did you use it 100% of the time this week, or did you, and particularly with cubies, you know, did you use it 100% of the time, or did you go back to your old ways for a little bit because you just didn't want to sit and use the QB that day? It's important for us to do a complete scientific study on this. We really need to have that information. So I think even if you didn't have 100% use, there's benefit in that data, but we just need to have it properly qualified.
So, to me, one of the challenges is if we're asking people to retrofit. And if we could find a way to incorporate this into new construction, and where do we have most of the new construction in town in these affordable housing, 40B type projects? So I wonder if one strategy might be to try to mandate this in those types of projects, where you basically then have 100% participation because it's built in, and it goes to your points about let's make it part of the infrastructure, not just a 20-liter, polyethylene bottle you pee in.
I'm gonna open it up to people in the audience. Again, I want people to stay focused on what we're talking about. There's a gentleman in the back, I don't know your name. Why don't you jump? People should come to the microphone because we are actually live on TV, I'm told. Just identify yourself.
Hi, Chris Inouye, East Falmouth. I've got a lot of notes here, but first to Ed, I've been urine diverting now since May. That's before, all this really came to the forefront. And the use, I started with a bucket, and I moved up to a small container with a lid, and then now to a QB. And that isn't a long-term solution, I agree. It's great for ascertaining certain elements. First of all, getting over the ick factor of dealing with urine. That's a big stumbling block to a lot of this, I know, for people. The other thing is you get a real sense about the quantity of urine you produce. Now, I'm right on schedule now for 100 gallons a year, and that's right in line with the figure I've heard from other sources. And that brings me to this storage tank line here on your proposal, 5 275-gallon IBC containers. My calculations, if you do this for 3 years with 50 participants at 100 gallons, that's 15,000 gallons of urine. So that, I'm not quite sure if you want to revise that bulk storage container.
You're suggesting the size is a little too large.
Though they don't have sufficient storage.
Oh, it's inadequate, okay.
Completely inadequate, yeah. They have 1,375 gallons of storage.
I mean, to provide a little detail, just behind the selection of that, we don't anticipate holding all of the urine as part of the project at the test center. This is a small amount for processing through the urine pasteurizer. So there was no intent to try to account for all of the capacity of all 50 homes. It was
all at once.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And then you've got a $1,000 subsidy for 50 participants. I'm totally committed to using the QB for 2 years, or any kind of container in my 55-gallon drum. That's I'm not going to need that. I question the need for using water meters, especially in a case where people are just using QBs or something like that, because you're storing the urine, you have it in a storage container, and you're going to measure the quantity of urine and the concentration of nitrates. So you have a fixed number of pounds of nitrate removed from the system. So it doesn't seem like you need to add the complication of a water meter in that situation. And that also goes along with the thing about monitoring the septic tanks, because from what I understand is of the urine diversion toilets and the QBs, these are all going into separate storage containers, which are going to be measured for concentration and volume. So once again, you are going to determine the amount of nutrients removed from the system, right? From that information alone, that you don't really need to monitor what's in the septic tank before and after the project, right? Because it's going into a separate container. Yeah,
I think I would just take comments at this point. I don't want to do the back and forth a little bit. You know, again, we're gonna know a lot more after we talk with the DEP about what they want to see or not see. I'm gonna go this side, and hand up over here. Yeah, you. Want to identify yourself?
My name is Michael Duffany. I live in Precinct 6. My question is, and I'm much in favor of the urine diversion, is can I do a single bathroom in my home? And the reason I say that is versus, you know, a lot of people have, some people have one bathroom, some have half a dozen. Most of us use one bathroom probably 80 to 90% of the time. And so, you know, in my getting on board with this, I have identified a particular bathroom in our house that gets 90% of the use. And so I just, is that going to be allowable versus the whole house?
I'm going to say that's a great question. This goes back to, what's the DEP going to allow? You know, this is like not quite a title, it's not quite a compost toilet, you know, or an IA thing. So really, what the conversation that we're going to start with Mary Beth in 2 weeks will be, you know, like it happened under the compost. Does everything have to be changed over? Can you change over a portion or not? So that these are things we want to, you know, put forth and say, you know, if we can get one bathroom out of 3 and divert that away, that's good. How much nitrogen credit are you going to give us on our estuary if they have one? You know, if you got 3, what do we get? You know, it's going to take some time back and forth to get there.
Well, it also might eliminate some of the other, you know, pieces that you wouldn't necessarily need. You wouldn't have to have the meter. You know, it'd be one standalone for one bathroom.
Yep.
And then, I don't know if it's a good question to ask, but, you know, would the people in the room, how many of us would be willing to participate in the program? I mean, you're trying to get an idea of numbers.
Yeah, how many people would participate in a urine diversion program? There you go.
This, of course, is a highly unbiased audience.
It may be
Totally random
it could be a
selection of the
self-selected, yeah.
town.
And how many people are already doing this?
Yeah, but, you know, I think, when, I know, I just want to stay with, you know, you're a town meeting member. There's a citizens petition article. You might want to stand up and ask for a show of hands at town meeting. Okay, front row here. I'll ask you to identify yourself as well.
I'm Matthew Patrick, former member of the WQMC. I've got so many responses to all of your questions because I've lived with 3 urine diversion toilets for the past 10 years. I was a part of the first project. And I'd like to offer myself up as a potential assistant to Mr. Jelliwick in this project going forward.
I'm going to leave it up to Ed because it's going to be his sort of group.
Okay.
I'm looking to stay within the confines of.
All right. I just want to say that
Public open meeting law, that only 2 board members can work together at a time, but they can invite other people in.
Okay, I want to say that the main incentive for this is for people who live around freshwater ponds. Your mission does not include freshwater ponds. You're solely really concerned with our saltwater issues and nitrogen removal. So this gives an option, an important option for people who are watching their ponds deteriorate before their very eyes, and they're really concerned. They're concerned about the real estate value of their homes, and that's the incentive for them to participate. Another issue is in the cost. The $10,000, that might only pay for one toilet. Our previous incentive was $7,000 for the first one. I didn't use it because I was a member of the WQMC. I didn't use the incentives, but we put in 3, and that cost almost $20,000. Okay, so that could be a disincentive to people to participate because they look at the expense, and if they have to do all the bathrooms in their house, it's going to cost quite a bit of money out of their pocket. And again, in the original project, you had people that were expecting sewers, and to ask them if they wanted a UD toilet, and they're saying, well, UD toilet, sewers, nah, I think I'll stick with a sewer because it's subsidized and so on and so forth. I'm gonna, in the long run, that was the appropriate answer at that time. I just have, a lot of, I can add a lot to this conversation, but I don't want to take up too much of your time at this point.
I think I saw Ed make a little note.
That you volunteered.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to this side. Kim?
So, Kim Comart with the Falmouth Pond Coalition. I'm really glad you're having this conversation. I just really appreciate it. I got a report today that there's a cyanobacteria, first cyanobacteria bloom in our pond, deep pond in Falmouth. It was sort of a shock. So this is just a real issue for us, and I'm traveling around town, I'm just seeing ponds badly degraded. Go to Cedar Lake in North Falmouth, you can almost walk across it. It's a disaster. Look at Shallow Pond, right off Thomas Landers Road by Jagat. Look at Mill Pond, we drive by it all the time. So we really, this, as Matt said, this is a critical issue for us, especially folks on freshwater ponds. I bought a Cinderella incinerating toilet. It arrived yesterday. I have pictures of it here. I have really nice pictures on my phone. That is it's another option for people who may, and of course it doesn't save the urine, and it doesn't pee cycle, but some people may want an incinerating toilet. It's a really nice device. The Wostman Echo Flush toilet, I'm ordering one. Got to get permission from the state and the town to install it. That's $338 for the Wostman Echo Flush toilet. It's a dual chamber toilet. I talked to the folks in Sweden about 4 days ago about it because I wanted to make sure they could ship some. I just also want to put something quickly in perspective. In November and April, Amy and you folks are going to be coming to town meeting for a total, it seems like, close to $60 million, maybe $55 million for the design, permitting, and construction of sewers and sewer-related apparatus.
Kim, are you talking to the proposal that we have? Or are you
Talking-
talking to the sewering article?
I'm talking about the sewering article.
And then you're out of order. You need to talk
Okay,
to the
the
proposal.
reason I want to say it is that for that same amount of money, this town could purchase and install 9,000 Cinderella toilets. Purchase and install 9,000 Cinderella toilets. You'd have 2 toilets in 4,500 homes in this community. Imagine the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus reduction you would get from 9,000 toilets. The other thing I want to say is this issue of that Mike raised. I think Mike's right that for some people in this audience, like Laura Lubin here, her thing is, well, if I replace all the toilets in my house, am I going to get a waiver and not have to install an IA septic system at some point? We don't know the answer to that.
This is again, we're starting the conversation.
It's another one of these questions. That's a very important issue. It's going to be a very important issue for a lot of people. And then Ken, Doug Brown sat here in April and suggested that the town change the building code for new construction and mandate eco toilets. So that, I think it's a great, interesting idea. And Steve, I second your idea of going to the town to the county and seeing if the county can provide funding for this. Hilda and Earl have been in touch with Dan Gesson. Dan is pursuing funding as we speak, so I think we should.
Just for the audience, Dan Gesson is?
He's our representative to the Barnstable County Assembly,
Yes, he is.
and
I just wanted to be, like, you throw it in there, I just wanted to let everybody who's watching and whatnot.
yeah. So he's actively pursuing this. So the last thing I'll say is, we need solutions and we need them quickly. The sewering, I understand we need it. It's the most appropriate technology in some congested area, densely populated areas. We can't wait 20, 25 years for this. I know we're hopefully going to get it, some people are hoping for an outfall pipe. On our ponds, we need solutions now. So this is another tool in the toolbox, and I hope that I think the Mass Tech proposal is excellent. I heartily endorse it. I would like to see the salary or the funding for the consultant in year 2 and not just year 1. And I would like to see funding for marketing materials. Ed said wisely, this is partly a marketing issue. There's no money in there for marketing materials, and I think that would be very helpful. All right, thank you very much.
I started this meeting by indicating that this meeting will end after 2 hours at 6:30. We have other items on the agenda, and I'm going to give people an opportunity to speak. But I want you to be concise and to the proposal, not to the overall, our composting toilets or urine diversion toilets, good or bad. I think, Kim, your comments at the end that maybe an extra year of something specific to the proposal, that's what I want to hear as we go forward. Next person. Another person who can stand up and identify himself.
Are you pointing at me?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Our Finance Committee representative.
Peter Hargraves.
Hilda, you're next.
Oh, sorry.
Hilda's been raising her hand. Hilda's next. I just want to let her know.
Okay. Peter Hargraves, Precinct 9. I'm also on the Finance Committee and president of our neighborhood association, which is 34 households, and 3 of us are separately and independently testing mitigation effects for phosphorus with an outside company. I'm not here to advocate for or against any solution, but I am a passionate advocate for the process by which we do business in town. And so I just have 2 questions. They're very short, to the point of this whole thing. And I know that, Ms. Mora brought up something a half hour ago, and it hasn't been discussed again. So I'd just like to put the cherry on that soda. I would like to know if the Water Quality Management Committee, that has a lot of respect, and people listen to your recommendations on these types of items, if you're going to have a fully finalized test proposal and an opinion on it before September 11th, which is when the warrant needs to go to the printer. And, contrary to some things I've heard here, the Select Board do not make recommendations on financial matters, and anything related to finance goes through the Finance Committee. And so before then, we have to do a deliberation and vote on any funds that might be given to this project. And I'd like to hasten to add that I'm not trying to put up a hurdle here, but because I'd hate to see a good idea trip on a bad process, because this is so far different from where this whole discussion started. I hear us talking about, importantly, consumer habits and practices and how to make this relevant so that it'll be an attractive solution. And then we need to get the data. I'm all for science, I'm an engineer. But can you tell me, will you have an opinion before September 11th and a recommendation from the Water Quality Management? And also, I see people waving a test plan around.
Let me answer your first question.
Well, okay.
We will not, the next time we meet is after September 11th, which I've asked for the subcommittee to recommend how we will respond to the petitioner's article. The petitioner's article, as submitted, has no financial number in it. Although, as you well know, people on the floor of town meeting can amend any article to inject a number as long as they have a funding source. Not the way I would like to go, Peter, but that's where we're at.
We're not gonna, well, okay, I'm not gonna speculate, but I think to expect $1 million article to be funded from the floor is kind of pie in the sky. And that's the process issue that I'm talking about in terms of having it buttoned up with the expert committee recommending a plan that we all understand. I'd love to see the proposed plan. I see people waiving documents. I haven't had any option.
I've said this several times during the meeting, I'll say it again. We've got a meeting with Mary Beth Chubb from the DEP, who is the gateway to figuring out what happens with any pilot proposal and the usefulness of any pilot proposal towards getting the DEP to accept urine diversion as a viable technology for reducing nitrogen. So that is after the 11th date that you're referencing. Okay, that's the reality of the timetable we're on right now.
But there is a planned draft. Is that available on your website or something, or?
We can put the proposal we have onto our website.
Because other people are interested, and I think that for the kind of money that I've heard discussed here, we're going to need to educate and inform people about, not that this is a science project, but rather something that's relevant to solving our nitrogen issue. Thank you.
Amy or Kristen, one or the other, you can take care of getting it on the webpage. Thank you. Amy? No, Hilda, I said Hilda, I want, yeah.
This is very quick, and it's a comment. The UD toilets are not necessarily hard to adapt to. We have had them for years. We have had renters that took 1 minute to explain and never had an issue. Never. So it's very, very easy. It's not like people say, oh, you have to get used to it, and one day you don't want to, and the other day you want to. It's just a toilet that you sit on. There's nothing different than any other toilet.
Right.
You don't even have to think about it.
I've asked everybody to talk to the proposal, because time is short
Well,
here.
that's what I want to make sure, because that was said to the public, that it was really hard, and someday you don't feel like it. It's the only thing we have, but it's not any different than any other toilet.
Yep, okay. Amy?
I think this proposal.
Identify yourself, please.
Amy Lowell, wastewater superintendent.
Thank you.
I think the proposal is a good proposal for data collection. I think that I want to be very careful that I think it's very important to be clear about what the pilot accomplishes and what it doesn't accomplish. So as the primary goal, or what's happening is urine collection as part of this pilot. There is a very small experimental or test component of treatment, but I want to make sure that in the end, the proposal is clear about what it can say legitimately based on the pilot about treatment and discharge, so that we're not comparing, so that we compare apples and oranges. We don't compare apples and oranges. We can't say that urine diversion, just the collection side of it, is equivalent to wastewater treatment, collection, treatment, and disposal. So it may be that we need, if the first phase of this goes well, the town, I would see a second and maybe even a third phase where the town looks at the treatment and disposal of the urine as well.
I think I have time for one or two more comments at most. I'm going to go, we have a person over here who's not yet spoken tonight.
I'm Molly Bang. I just have one detail, which is that since this is a water quality situation, the urine diversion toilet, I'm using one of the cubies, and I never flush the toilet anymore, except once a day. So you do need to figure out how much water you're saving as well as how much urine you're diverting. That's it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go early. You get to close up here. You got 30 seconds. No.
Okay. This is about the water. It's important to measure the water, because if you have a waterless urinal, you don't flush 4 out of 5 times. The citizen does not have to pay for that water. The town does not have to provide that water for thousands of homes.
All right, I'm going to close discussion on this. Is there anybody on this committee that would like to work with Ed? Tom? Okay, so you can, you've got at least one volunteer. I would suggest that you don't want to have 20 people at a time. You want to focus on coming back to this board with a couple of comments in the, for those of you keeping track, I believe, Kristen, we've set up, our next meeting is on the 13th in this room. That's a Wednesday, with a following meeting on the 27th in this room. And in typical fashion, you'll see an agenda come out to you shortly thereafter. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the input. And, you know, we do want to get to a good proposal. Corin's in the background, and it occurs to me, Corin, John Waterbury's comment relative to what it took to get a group of people around West Falmouth Harbor and the lessons learned from that, and what we did around West Falmouth Harbor. Not going to just tell people how they should set up their pilot program right now, but to the extent that you can perhaps, Kim, identify a pond going forward where we can really work hard to get enough homes to actually start measuring a difference in the pond from doing this, to me seems like an opportunity, you know, and then be able to replicate that and say to people, you want your pond clean, look, you know, 40%, 50% of us at this pond got into this program and things got better, you know, and do it. And I think there are a lot of valuable lessons learned, Corin, that, you know.
Can I say one quick thing about supporting that? I totally agree with what Steve said, and there's one aspect of it that you won't like, and that we will, and that it's an unbiased sample. If you can show that all the people living around that pond will put up with that, you have a very powerful marketing point. But you have to do it.
All right. Again, thank you for all of you that are here and participating. The next item on the agenda is a revised draft letter to town meeting members. A lot of comment last time around. My understanding is Ken, you and Tom have been working diligently on this. Which one did I miss?
But
Steve, don't forget
the
Steve.
PRB
Number 4.
continuation.
Oh, I am sorry. Yeah, yeah. So there is item 4, a request to the select board to authorize funding from the AFC account for the continued monitoring efforts of the Shorewood Drive PRB. This is, I think, your bailiwick, you were asked to get some numbers. They're pretty small.
So this follows the last presentation Matt gave before he abandoned the committee about the continued monitoring. The committee had discussed monitoring every 6 months for 2 years just to see what the duration would be. So I got the quote for the analysis portion and consumables from Hooley, and that was over about $1,300, a little more per sampling event. The last time you guys continued sampling, it was a request to the select board for AFC funds not to exceed $5,000 for 4 sampling events, but with the uptick in price, I would say you'd want to look at $6,000, $6,500 as the request.
Can I get a motion?
I'll move that it be put forward as $6,500.
To the select board?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Okay. Any discussion, any further discussion? Any further discussion from the audience? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, now to the revised draft letter to town meeting members.
Gordon, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to ask,
Oh, sorry.
and you may have said it and I apologize, but how many samples is that?
So it was the same 8 samples, because it was 4 depths prior on the 2-year side, before the PRB and after the PRB, so it's 16 samples per sampling event. So 2
many
sampling events per year.
Okay, only 2. Okay, that's what I wanted. That's perfect.
32 samples
Right,
annually.
that's where we're getting.
Yeah.
Aye.
It's a bargain, no matter how you slice it.
That's good.
So, Ken and Tom have been the primary sort of rewrite authors on a letter to town meeting members. I hope everybody got a copy of it.
We haven't voted it.
No, we have not voted on this, and I think it's gonna be a discussion item, and it's
Right.
gonna come back.
Yeah.
But before we go there, relative to that, I have indicated several times that we're all going to take responsibility for contacting certain town meeting
Yes.
members. What I did is I took the entire list of town meeting members, and I bin sorted them. I just numbered them 1 through 7, so that somebody doesn't get all of precinct 1 or all of precinct 2. And so, you're welcome to play this like fantasy football and trade names back and forth. If you know somebody and you want to get credit for an easy one and give an easy one away. There's 4 of you to that side. Yep, got 4. There's 2 to this side, and I have 1. So these are the folks that, between now and town meeting, I hope you find time to reach out to one way or another.
Is this are these all different, these lists?
I numbered, yeah, they're all different. I numbered the entire list, 1 through 7,
And
and then
Steve-
bin sorted them by numbers 1. So you see precinct on the left.
What you need to send us by email is everybody else's lists, so that I know who to propose trades with.
Yeah.
Right, right, I think that's a good idea.
Or to pay others to do.
No problem, okay? Yeah. So that's a sort of a business part of this thing here, to get names out to everybody.
Steve, I've already been able to outsource this to a guy in India, so don't ask anyone to.
Be careful what you say, you're on live TV.
Not sure I can convince Waterbury.
Sorry.
I figure after I do this, I can get a job in India.
Okay, guys, stay focused. Who wants to talk about this?
Talk about the letter?
Yeah, you or Tom?
Well, first of all, I want to, you didn't mention Steve Layton, and he was,
Yeah.
that's 1/3.
Yeah,
If not.
more than a third.
Slightly more than a third.
He was-
Involved in this, so I think he needs to be given credit.
Well, last
too.
time I spoke to Steve, he said you guys did all of the work, and you didn't want any credit, so I'm just following what he told me.
So it's, so what I would, you all have the draft, you can look it over. I would say we reached consensus on most of it. There's a couple parts of it that I think we still have some debate on.
Okay.
But at this point, I think maybe the committee should comment,
Yeah.
What do you like?
Yep.
What don't you like?
If you've read it before the meeting, and have comments, now would be a good time. Otherwise, can I make a suggestion? Do you want them to come to you, Tom, or?
To me is fine. I've already offered a few changes.
Yeah, I know.
No matter how many times I've read this, I come back and one more time look at a couple of things that could be
I
changed.
think, one other comment I would make is that I think we took to heart the advice that someone in the audience made about keeping it brief and to the point.
Yes.
And that's might be where there's some debate within our view, because I think it could be even briefer. But we did break it out into sections, so it's clear what we're addressing in each section, so.
Maybe the suggestion here is that if anybody has specific comments to it, they can pass to Tom. And that at the next meeting, we will attempt to finalize this, but in the meantime, it can be used as a talking article going forward. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, and
But
this is your
sooner-
copy.
Sooner rather than later, please.
Yep, yep. All right, and now moving on to reports of members and staff. John, I think you might have a little report.
I had 2 things. One, I accompanied Steve to with the Heights Association summer meeting at the Falmouth Yacht Club on the 5th of August. And Steve had been in dialogue with their chairman, so that we're not surprising those communities when we start to talk about an outfall. It was clear that within the Heights, there was a lot of interest when it was sent as part of their agenda that that's what we wanted to talk about. So the Falmouth Yacht Club was filled to capacity. Steve talked to them. The issues which come up, how is it going to impact our beaches? What's going to happen if we what will the project look like and how will it impact Kite Park? Those sorts of things. But I think the impression that both Steve and I took away was that that community feels, okay, this is something which is a Falmouth project which is going to benefit our town, and if we have to tighten our belts and put up with a certain period of construction, but I had the feeling that that committee would be willing to do that. Steve also went to the T-Ticket Association. I didn't accompany him to that, but your impression sort of the same there, Steve?
Yeah, and we have a couple of members of that association here with us, and they can speak to it if they have a contrary opinion, but we talked a little bit more as to why we were not going land-based and why we were going outfalls. It was a slightly different presentation on the details of how you construct things or how much space you need than we did at the Heights, but I thought it was informative. There were a lot of questions, because we also covered some of the Title V issues coming up. I thought there was a little more comments on the Title V issues at that meeting. Is that a fair summary?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Okay. And we appreciate the fact that you invited us there and you had a good turnout there too. I don't know, you have 30, 40 people in the room?
Yeah.
Well, they offered good cookies, I have to say that.
Absolutely, always do. It's why I'm a member.
That draws the crowd in. Okay. And you said you had a second item, John?
The second item was, Steve asked me to review, we've sort of been coalescing around an outfall as our primary discharge for the future of wastewater discharge. And that was made possible because the Ocean Sanctuaries Act got changed in 2014 to allow outfalls with advanced treatment. And as part of, so no municipality has yet applied for an outfall. And the coalition in putting together, they were sort of, I actually did a lot of the work getting us through the state to change the Sanctuaries Act. But they then sat down with their science advisory group and put together a white paper which they sent to the state in 2017. And that white paper outlined what they thought an application by a municipality for an outfall should look like. And it covered impacts to aquifer, what happened to the receiving waters, a whole series of things in some considerable detail. So that was sent to the state and was not responded to. And so as we have begun thinking about putting together an application for an outfall here in Falmouth, we're sort of using that white paper as our guide to think about how we do that. And we've taken a number of steps. We've already had Jim Churchill, who was a physical oceanographer at the Oceanographic, look at the physics of Vineyard Sound and done that for us. But what we're looking for at Fall Town Meeting is an appropriation be a line item in the omnibus capital budget for $1,400,000. And it will do several things. One is it will help with the water quality monitoring. The coalition has installed a buoy right at where we think we're going to be discharging off Kite Park. And there is funds to help them do the nutrient analyses. We've also contracted, I think it's Jim Churchill and Scott Gallagher.
We have not contracted with anybody, we have proposals.
We have a
We
proposal.
price proposals.
For them to do more eelgrass surveys, fishery surveys, benthic sedum, and infaunal studies that will be funded with that money. And then we've also gotten a proposal from USGS to do the impacts on the aquifer, on our sole source Sagamore lens. So it's going to be important for us to demonstrate as part of an application that by discharging a certain amount of wastewater into the sound, that we will not negatively impact the aquifer. And finally, to help get bids for doing horizontal drilling, we are proposing to ask for funds to do a series of borings out from Kite Park so that we could let potential bidders know what the sediments look like, and hope that by investing in those borings, we would get a bid that would be considerably lower because of, they wouldn't have to think about as risk as much. And so I think that sort of does it. So
The biggest amount of money in there is for the marine borings. These are at 500-foot intervals, and they go down over 100 feet because the directional drilling has to be far enough below the seabed that as the work is progressing, you don't risk any blowout from the drilling muds. But these are responsible numbers. Amy has done a lot of work through GHD to get these numbers together, and we're continuing to, look at our options to go forward, but we believe 1.4 million is the amount of money we need, and that includes in there, we will then be at a point when we complete these studies over the next year, that we'll be at a point to, in essence, have an application ready to go. We will have interacted with the various agencies, and then the next step after that will be to physically make the application. But we believe that a year or 18 months from now, depending on when, a couple of things like the marine borings probably need to be done outside of the eelgrass growth season, so that there's limited people to do that. We have to find the window of opportunity for doing those type of things. But we then believe we are at the cusp of, we've been working with agencies. They're not gonna be surprised, and then we wait to see on the next step, what pushback we get from people like the Army Corps or Coastal Zone Management or whatnot. But they typically won't be asking for studies so much as they're gonna wanna see the studies. That's right. Go ahead, see.
This is the ignorant asking the expert, but how many potential bidders are there? I mean, you probably know them by name.
For what, for doing directional drilling?
Right, 4 or something, I mean, it's
Oh,
not,
no,
it's
this-
not a dozen, right?
It's not, right now, it would probably not be a dozen. I would say there's 6 to 8 firms in the New England, Mid-Atlantic region that would be more than willing to consider. What you would need to realize is that although there's very few outfalls going in, there's a lot of electric cables and gas lines and things that go in. So there's a real market.
The question is, would it make sense to talk to is it legal to talk to them and make sure that the 500-foot interval is meaningful to them? You don't want to spend all that money and then have half of them laugh and say that everybody in this field knows it's only meaningful if they're 200 feet apart or something.
So I'll try to answer your question as directly as I can. I've had conversations with at least 2 of
You've
the
already
folks
done
that
it.
might
Okay,
do
great.
this, as well as the fact that we've been talking to geotechnical folks who've done work in the marine environment. Any other comments? Any other comments on this sort of report or whatever?
Quick question. I commend you on your meeting with the yacht club. Did they actually endorse the project, or did they just say, well, we'll look at it?
We did not ask them for a direct endorsement, but we also gave them opportunity to comment and respond to it.
the reaction was dramatically different than the electrical cables coming through Worcester Court.
But their initial reaction when they first heard about the outfall, that was very negative. So I'm very happy to see that you were able to turn that around.
My impression is that that's not going to be our greatest hurdle.
No.
I believe that the more information people have about why something is happening and what will happen when something happens, the more they will come on board. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking to them about what the physical process would be to directionally drill, how long it would take, likely duration, necessary time, the work area, You know, one of the things about directional drilling is they can be noisy if somebody's running a generator 24/7. We've already confirmed that we have three-phase power and would require them to utilize electricity rather than generators, although they would have a generator on site if there was a storm in the winter and everybody started to lose power. They would stay out there and work because they do not want to lose that directional drilling. Are there other committee reports?
No report, and this is a little bit into the weeds, but since we're talking about the outfall, I was looking again at the executive summary for assessing the environment, and there they mentioned they did the model at 4 million. I thought they did it at 2 and 4 million gallons per day.
They did it at 2 and 4 too. Did they just
Didn't
do it
they
at
run the
4?
model at both?
You're talking about Tim Churchill?
Yeah, you're back into the Kite Park addendum?
Yeah, well, the executive summary of his report
I'll look at it.
said they only mentioned the 4 million gallons per day, and I know that in the past we've discussed that it was run at 2 and 4.
It was.
Because right now we're running at 1.7, right?
Yeah, we'll check the summary.
Okay, anyway, just, it's a real minor point.
But our future flow is envisioned to be about 1.7.
Oh, future, okay. Anyway, it just, when I saw it, the only thing they mentioned in the summary was the 4 million
We'll back check.
results, and I thought the 2 million looks great compared to, I mean, the 4 is great, the 2 looks super great. Anyway, that's a real,
As the committee's official scrivener, you've once again found a scrivener's error. Yeah, it sounds like a typo.
yeah, okay. Just, it's a real minor thing, but that's what I remembered was it running, so. Now,
Any other committee reports? We got 30 seconds.
minutes.
Okay. All right. Minutes?
I move to approve as written.
Wait a minute. This is
I
Tom's
still want some wiggle room. Real minor stylistic point, Kristen, I think anytime we use an acronym, we should spell it out the first time, because we've got to think, sometime somebody looks through it, gonna read these minutes, and they're gonna go, what's a CWMP, or what's any of them? And I flagged a couple here that I'll give you afterwards, and I think that's the only thing I added to my already revised.
I was gonna say, you know you already reviewed them.
I know, but each time I go back and look at these things, I see one or two more things. But anyway, that's my only comment, and I will get together with Kristen about that.
I have a vote. I have a motion.
Yeah, you've already, I move as updated by Tom.
Second.
In real time.
There's a move and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, do I have another motion?
Yes, John moves for adjournment.
I know, I was absent, so I abstained.
On the minutes.
You did, okay.
Now we're looking for a motion to adjourn.
Now we're looking for a
Also
motion.
move.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion to adjourn? All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I missed by a few minutes, but I think we did
bad.
pretty good to get through this agenda. The timetable we had.
Our select board chairman would be proud that you moved it along.